Hey, what's going on? I'm Sam, I'm 31 years old, and now I'm 6 months sober, and I'll be sharing everything about that journey on this channel, so follow along if you're interested in that. In this video, I'm going to be talking specifically about why it's not your fault if you struggle to control your drinking, the science to support it, and also my own experience with that exact journey as well. So, first of all, why I'm making this video is because when I had to stop and I was a binge drinker, I didn't drink every day. It was mostly limited to weekends, but it was the classic example of like when I started, I found it really hard to stop. Sometimes I'd manage it if I wasn't with, the wrong people. If I was just out with my girlfriend, for example, sometimes it was okay, but more often than not, I'd end up really drunk, more drunk than I wanted to get. That would end up in doing stuff I regretted, feeling horrendous the next day, and taking way more away from my life than it was giving. So after finally accepting that, after around 15 years of binge drinking, I took the leap and decided I had to go sober for good. And that's a scary thing in itself, but what makes it feel worse and what made me feel a lot worse was this feeling that I had in somehow failed as a person, right? That my inability to control my alcohol intake was effectively my inability to adult and a lack of willpower, a bit childish in some way, and just generally something that I had to do better at. And the evidence that in my mind that I had to support that was, well, most people can drink in a way that's healthy. Surely that means that, the problem is with me and not with alcohol. And I believed that for a while, and it made me feel really bad. But what I learned on my sort of process of reading around this topic a lot was, first of all, alcohol is an addictive substance. Now that's not news in itself, but because it's so socially accepted and it's sold in supermarkets and we see people around us drinking it, it's so easy to forget what it actually is, which is a really highly addictive substance, just like other hard drugs out there. So it should be no surprise when some of us are unable to control it. And I think it's really helpful to have an idea of the numbers when we're talking about this. So 400 million people worldwide suffer from alcohol use disorder. That's 7% of the adult population, okay? So almost 1 in 10 people. That's not 1 in 10 people that have a willpower issue. That's 1 in 10 people whose biology is reacting to an addictive substance in such a way that makes it problematic. And I was no different, and maybe you're no different as well. So that's the first thing. Alcohol is addictive. It stimulates the reward pathway in your brain and gives you such a dopamine spike. And for some of us, that is stronger than others, and it makes you chase that feeling on and on from there. And you might be wondering at this stage, well, why is it that it affects people differently? Why are some people able to drink, in a healthy way and I'm not? Well, there's also a lot of good research that's been done on that as well. Now, there is a 50 to 60% likelihood increase that you will suffer from alcohol use disorder if you have a family history of it. I have a family history of it. It was always something that I was kind of aware of, but I didn't know that it had that much of an impact. And again, it made me feel better about having struggled myself, because ultimately, with some of the cards that I was dealt, it was probably always going to be an uphill battle for me to engage with alcohol in a positive way. The other things that might affect whether you develop alcohol use disorder or not and be different to one of your friends are things like your mental health. So, for example, I think I'm right in saying that having things like ADHD make you more likely to abuse alcohol. I know from personal experience, having anxiety led to me drinking a lot more, then feeling worse the next day and feeling more anxious, and then compounding that by drinking again, and so on and so forth. So mental health can play a big factor. Societal circumstances, upbringing. No two people at the neuron level, at the societal level, at the, whatever, were created the same when it comes to how we interact with alcohol. So this is not me saying that nobody can control their intake of alcohol, but those that can't, there's generally a very good reason for it. And another thing I find helpful to realize as well is how many people do you know that drink alcohol regularly? And even if they're some of the people that quote unquote can control it, right? That can control it well. Even those people oftentimes will overdo their consumption of alcohol, right? Have one too many, say something they didn't want to say, and, you know, generally have a suboptimal experience with it. And they're the ones that can manage it well, right? So, and again, why is that? Why is that? That's because it's incredibly addictive. It makes you want more of it. That's just the way alcohol interacts with your system. So again, that was another thing that helps me frame it in the right way. I think the other thing that I found really helpful in terms of seeing alcohol for what it was finding out that it is the most harmful drug in the world. And that study was done by a guy called Professor David Nutt. And I believe he was the government's drugs advisor at the time. And after finding this out, he was also removed from his post, which, does make you wonder what was going on there. And certainly people didn't like hearing that alcohol was the most harmful drug in the world, over and above things like crack cocaine and heroin. But the reason why I find that helpful to know is, you know, is it any surprise that so many of us struggle to interact in a healthy way with the most harmful substance on earth in terms of drugs that are, you know, recreationally consumed? It shouldn't be a surprise at all. The other thing that I learned that really chimed with my personal experience was when I used to start drinking, I'd have like 3 pints and I'd get that initial feeling of euphoria, that buzz, that warmth. But no matter how much I drank after that, that feeling would never come back. And what would end up happening is I would just kind of go in search of that feeling and chase it and chase it and chase that buzz. Obviously, until I got to a point where I drank so much that I was then completely smashed, horrible anxiety the next day, and a terrible situation all round. And I think I'm right in saying that essentially what's happening there is when you have your first few drinks, you get a massive, the reward system in your brain is firing massively. You get a massive dopamine spike, but then your brain works to dampen that reward system, that feeling of reward. So the more you drink, you don't get that initial feeling again. And also, as you're drinking more, your blood alcohol level is rising and rising and rising physically as the mental feeling is dissipating. So in search of topping up the mental feeling, which is so hard to do, you're throwing so much alcohol in your body that eventually your blood alcohol level is to a point where you're completely intoxicated and no chance of feeling anything much at all. So understanding that I was fighting a losing battle from a sort of chemical and biological perspective, I found to be really, really helpful. And for me, it's also just a case of realizing, like, our brains are not designed to deal with such a strong dopamine hit that alcohol or other drugs provide. And it's no wonder that, you know, we want more and more of it until it presents as an issue. So at this stage, I hope you're feeling a little bit better about if you've struggled yourself with the amount of alcohol that you drink, or maybe a loved one is drinking too much and you kind of struggle to understand why. I think it's really helpful to know that alcohol is really addictive, know that it's one of the most harmful drugs on planet Earth, know that it affects 400 million people to a clinical alcohol use disorder level, and that in a lot of cases, once you've had that first drink, you just can't control it after that. The one thing that I will say about this, though, is that I don't want to avoid responsibility entirely, because whilst you might not be able to decide after you've had the first drink, you can decide before you've had the first drink. And don't get me wrong, it took me like 15 years to accept that I had a problematic relationship with alcohol and do something about it. And I went sober one time for a year, tried to reintroduce it, became a problematic a drinker again, and then gave up finally. So it took me a while to get there, but the reality is that we do have a responsibility to work to sort it out for us, for those around us. And so, it's not to say there is no responsibility involved in this, but it does take a lot of falling over, and it does take a lot of time to accept it and also to finally kick the habit. But what I want to show on this channel as well, and I haven't posted many videos yet, but is that sobriety can be the best thing that ever happened to you and a gift rather than a punishment. Because I know it felt like a punishment to me in the beginning, and it felt like I wasn't going to be able to have this really, really enjoyable thing, when in reality all alcohol is borrowing happiness from the next day, paying tax on it double, and yeah, you're fighting a losing equation. So I'll be talking a lot about that on this channel, doing vlogs as well as talking videos like these. I also post a lot about sobriety on my Instagram at Sam Back on Track, so make sure you follow me on there as well. Hit subscribe, and yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Would love to hear from other people in the community, and yeah, big love, appreciate you all.